Well, welcome back to the Trade Desk. I'm Ayrton Woolley, joined by Sam McClure. Sam, looks like we've got a few missed calls there. Maybe some trades we'll go through shortly.
It's gone early with the trade gag, okay.
I know, it's normally your gag, but it's my gag today. But anyway, we've got some deals to talk about shortly, but not really the big names. We want to go through the big names who are outstanding first. And let's take a look at the guys who yet to be done with, I guess, basically 2 hours and change left, 2 days and change left in this trade period. Jeremy Cameron, we spoke about yesterday. Adam Treloar, a really interesting one now, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what, in the way we're going, it could be all these deals to go down in the last 2 hours. I mean, there hasn't been a whole lot happening other than some side trades that we'll get to. Adam Treloar, clearly the biggest one of those. I know that Jeremy Cameron, you would argue that he's a bigger story and a bigger player, but I don't think anyone really realistically thinks that he won't get to Geelong. I feel like it's going to be 2 first-round draft picks as part of the deal. Adam Treloar, though, here we are with, 72 hours to go, or less, 48 hours to go, and we don't know where he's going, but we probably think that he's leaving the Collingwood Football Club. I still think it's the Western Bulldogs, number one in line. My understanding is they are actually getting to the point where they would like to meet him. They're not sure what's going to happen with Josh Dunkley. They still would prefer not to trade him. But if they're going to trade him, then they want to look at the Treloar situation. Now, you can't really take on a contract of $900,000 a year, albeit Collingwood probably paying a portion of that, without meeting the player. I mean, the Gold Coast Suns Ayrton pulled out of the deal early because they didn't want a guy arriving on big money with a 5-year deal that didn't want to be there because it could upset, the culture of the rest of the players. You can understand that. So I think the Western Bulldogs will get to a point in the next few hours or maybe the next 24 hours where they say, OK, Adam, let's sit down.
A few days ago, we learned, or we believed, that Adam Treloar had accepted his time at Collingwood was up.
Yep.
Do you think now that he's still holding out hope that he could repair some of those relationships that has happened with players in the past? Because if it's not the Western Bulldogs, where is it for him? It seems like his options are really dwindling. I know Hawthorn have had mild interest. They're watching it closely, but they'd want it on the cheap. Carlton probably don't have the salary cap room. St Kilda don't have the room now, particularly now they're going for Jack Higgins. They've secured Brad Crouch. So it feels like his options are minimal, aren't they, outside of the Bulldogs or Collingwood? Yeah,
well, it's probably one of those two, isn't it? If it doesn't happen at the Western Bulldogs. I mean, I've said all along that I couldn't see him going back to Collingwood, but has to remain a chance, doesn't it? Because he has to be playing somewhere. Someone's going to have to be paying that big salary. If it's not the Western Bulldogs, does he walk back into Collingwood if it's just for one more year and say, OK, let's put this all behind us, let's try and move on? But there's just been so much that's happened, particularly in the public nature of it in the last 6 weeks. I think, people have compared it to the Joe Danaher situation, that he went back and played a year at Essendon. Bryce Gibbs went back and played a year at Carlton, but they didn't have the public fallout, did they, with their club at the time? This seems very different.
You reported here at the Trade Desk a few days ago that Collingwood were preparing to pay upwards of $100,000 of Adam Treloar's contract if he maybe went to the Gold Coast Suns or somewhere like that.
Yep.
Has that figure increased, do you think? And what's the maximum a club can pay? I mean, these are the great unknowns because clubs aren't going to come out and declare it. But what do we think the maximum Collingwood could pay is? Because even if they paid $200,000, it's still $700,000 a year the Bulldogs have to swallow over 5 years.
Yeah, well, it was $100,000 when he was going to the Gold Coast Suns. You and I talked about this last week. With the time that goes on, that figure probably increases, doesn't it? So speaking to a couple of football bosses in the last 24 hours, they've told me that, if they were in a position to get Adam Treloar, you'd want Collingwood to start to pay the 250, 300 upwards mark per year. So you're only paying him around the $600,000 mark, which is still a fair clip, isn't it? I mean, you're still paying a very good player at $600,000, but that money's going to have to be paid somewhere. And I know that we don't talk about the human side of this a lot during this time of the year, Ayrton, but you have to feel for Adam Treloar right now, don't you? I mean, he's got to a point where we've got 2 days left of the trade period. He has absolutely no idea where he's going to play next year, let alone until the end of 2025 when he's contracted to.
These 2 days might feel like months for Adam Treloar. We'll move on, though. We might take a look at those names again that are, I guess, up for grabs, potentially moving on. We might whip through a few. Sean Higgins, feel like that'll get done, but maybe after Jeremy Cameron. Is that fair?
I think that's right.
Orazio Fantasia's one. We're hearing, I guess, some reports that Port Adelaide might have cooled, and we'll touch on Alir shortly.
Well, we talked about that the first episode of the Trade Desk, didn't we? That there was an impasse because the Bombers want a future first-round pick, and Port Adelaide have said under no circumstances will they trade that pick. They haven't got a first-round pick this year, so I feel like it's either that pick in the 20s or it's bust for Orazio.
could it be potentially a future second-round pick to the Bombers bank on next year's draft, and maybe something they can get in that can work in with the Josh Dunkley deal?
Yeah, potentially. And then Josh Dunkley. Adam Sard, I cannot believe, Ed, that Adam Sard is not yet a Carlton player. When you do 3 weeks of work of trying to convince a guy to come to your footy club, you meet his family, you bring him through the club, introduce him to teammates, you offer him a 5-year deal at really good money, and then you offer up your first pick, but you're haggling over late picks back. I would have just thought, and Carlton will say, look, it's incumbent on us to get the best deal for our club and for our members. I understand that, but I tell you what, if you've put this much time and effort into him, just give your first round pick and move on, I think.
The Blues' latest offering actually seemed much fairer to me than what it had been, hoping just for a second-round pick. It seems like now they're asking for a
late swap.
Yeah, so they'll get a future second-round selection back from Essendon. They'll give a future third-round selection. So they'll effectively be moving up the draft order. Essendon hoping to hold on to that pick potentially for Jai Caldwell, and I guess that's the Bombers' reticence there. It feels like if Caldwell wasn't in the picture, do you think that deal would get done?
Probably, but I mean, he is in the picture, and he's not on that board that we're looking at now, Ayrton, but he's only played 11 games, so he probably doesn't deserve to be on that board right now. But Essendon believe that he is going to be, along with Josh Dunkley, as starting midfielder. I love the fact that Essendon have got aggressive here. You know, they were blindsided by Sard wanting to leave. They knew Fantasia would leave. They knew that Danaher would leave. Yes, they probably could have done a few of these deals 12 months ago, but if they can get Caldwell in, albeit I don't think a future second is what the Giants should receive, by the way. You take a guy, pick 11, and then you put 2 years into him, he plays 11 games and he leaves for less. I don't quite understand that, but if they can pull off those 2 deals and get Caldwell and get Dunkley, all of a sudden you've brought in 2 starting midfielders alongside the likes of Heppel and Zach Merritt, and that midfield that we've often criticised as not being deep enough, well, suddenly it is.
Certainly is. We've got Jack Higgins there. Feel like that's going to get done later in the trade period? I do. I know that Richmond have some reluctance. They believe he's worth more than a future second.
Well, he is, isn't he, Ayrton? I mean, he's 21. He had a really good first year. He was pick 17. He certainly hasn't gotten worse than pick 17.
My concern is, what is his ceiling? What is Jack Higgins' absolute best going to look like?
And I guess where's his best position, isn't it? Because he's 177 centimetres, so it's hard for those. We haven't seen heaps of those guys under 180 centimetres dominate at midfield level. We know he can get a heap of the footy at the lower level, but yeah, that's a fair concern. But I tell you what, if I'm Richmond, I'm not accepting that deal. I'm holding on to him.
We learned in the last 24 hours that Jaden Stevenson actually signed a contract extension quietly last year, and we believe it's pretty money. Pretty extensive as well in terms of money.
It's nearly $600,000 a season, so it's really good money.
So they're going to find hard to ship that, aren't they?
I would think so. I mean, and Collingwood will want value as well, so that's the thing. When you sort of make it known, although they've done it pretty quietly, that this guy's on the trade table, or on the trade desk, then, you know, you want value for him, even though you're trying to sort of say, hey, guys, come and have a look at him. They'd want a top 10 pick, and they'd want that other club to pay his salary. I think that's a big ask at the moment. Although every club you speak to say, we'd love to have him in our forward line because he's a point of difference. He's a taller player that plays small. He's a beautiful kick of the footy, can go up and play on the wing. He's quick, he's agile. He's a real point of difference. I
feel like Jaden Stevenson will bounce back this year. I reckon Hub Life might have posed some difficulties for him, particularly when you're out of form, really difficult to get back into form, especially with no second-level footy, I guess, that you can play beyond some scratch matches. But we'll move on now to, I guess, the deals that have been done. They're what we've been waiting for. Now, they weren't exactly... The first one wasn't one perhaps everyone had been hanging out for, but Peter Wright, the Gold Coast Sun, 2-metre Peter, there he is. He's moved to Essendon for a future 4th-round selection. He'll play that forward role, I guess, vacated by Joe Danaher. The Bombers been crying out for this type of player. Was a former top 10 draft pick, Sam. So it feels like there's only upside for Essendon. They're not going to give up. They've given up virtually nothing in terms of draft position. They're going to have to pay a decent salary, but the Suns are covering some of that too. Yeah,
it's a fascinating one. You talk about, Higgins' ceiling. What's the ceiling for Peter Wright? Because, a lot of the recruiters will say that the taller guys take longer to come on. He's 203 centimetres. Burst onto the scene really in his second year where he kicked 27 goals, which for a team like the Gold Coast Suns, who are consistently at the bottom of the ladder, is a really good return. He's had some injuries. He's had some bad calves that he's had to overcome. 66 games in his 5 seasons. And I think there are some clubs that think that his best position is the ruck. So at 203 centimetres, I know Danaher was 200 plus, but we haven't seen a lot of forwards at that size dominate, particularly in the modern game, have we? So is he coming there specifically to be a replacement for Joe Danaher and be that stay-at-home full forward out of the goal square, or are they going to use him interchangeably with the like of Sam Draper?
Well, I guess they did let Sean McKernan go. Perhaps they knew at that stage that Peter Wright could fill that second ruck role, the sort of forward ruck position. He is still only 24. I found that hard to believe. He hasn't. It feels like he's been around for a long time, Peter Wright. But
guys like didn't play last year either.
Guys like Tom Hawkins probably only came into their own around that age, didn't they? So it's starting to get to that age with the key forward that you might get something out of them. Yeah,
and this is the Essendon supporter coming out in Ayrton, just believing that Peter Wright is going to be the second coming.
Well, just looking at Leah now, actually just leaving Adelaide. We heard that was off, then on, then off, then on, and suddenly it's back on. He's met with Port Adelaide.
The one place that you wouldn't want to go to try to stay under the radar at the moment, I reckon, is South Australia, isn't it? Two-team town, and, I mean, look at the size of him. He sticks out. He's such a good player, and I think in the sense that he's very versatile. I don't reckon his ceiling has been reached, and I think that's what Port Adelaide have identified. And Port Adelaide, through Jason Cripps, their list manager, and also Chris Davies, their head of footy, have identified that while they've got a really good young base of players and they want to bring the likes of Dersma and Butters and Rosie to play in the midfield and develop that next crop, they are a little bit thin down back. And he can play forward as well, but I think he's proven at the Sydney Swans that he can be a genuine talent. So if they can get him across the line, he certainly becomes a best 18 footballer, I think.
Yeah, I was surprised when his name first came up in discussions because I thought Sydney would be fighting harder to keep him from what he's shown. But I know at different times there have been guys that they've had back there that have played in his position and they've been fairly strong in defence, Sydney. So maybe they see it as an area they can get a draft pick, someone through the door. Whoop.
Hang on. We just this is actually the first time that this is rung. GWS have traded pick 31 to the Melbourne Football Club for Braden Pruce.
Well, there you go.
So the GWS Giants have found their next ruckman. Obviously, they picked up Sam Jacobs this time a year ago. He filled a void. We know that Mumford is continuing on, I think, in a part-time coaching role. But Braden Pruce, who now joins his third club. We know that he was at North Melbourne under Todd Goldstein.
Then one of the more puzzling decisions a player's ever made in moving for more opportunity, but behind Max Gawn.
Yeah, well, I genuinely think that Simon Goodwin and Josh Marnie and Pruce himself thought that they could play together, because I don't think he would have signed a 3 or 4 year deal if he thought that he was going to be playing in the twos. Now, he tried to play interchangeably as a forward. It didn't really work. He now gets the opportunity to be number one ruckman. So there you go, Braden Pruce on his way to the GWS Giants. And Tim Hazel, who's one of the more lower profile, likes to stay under the radar player managers, he also manages Braden Pruce and Adam Treloar. So he probably 6 weeks ago thought he was in for a pretty quiet trade period. Ends up having two pretty significant players, and Treloar yet to get done, as we've discussed.
Just when you pick up the phone next time, mate, you meant to put it to your ear when you're listening to what's coming through.
Yeah, well, I'm just a bit worried because it is quite a used phone. Okay. And, just with the COVID restrictions, I give it a little wipe down.
You're an idiot. I can't even... We'll move on. Couldn't even say idiot properly. That's how well I'm going today, Sam. Anyway,
goodness me.
There was another deal done involving Melbourne. Mitch Hannon's on the way out, going to the Western Bulldogs. Yep. I know Melbourne fans, they don't love this trade because they're a big fan of Mitch Hannon. I can see why it's been done. He wants to change the scenery. He's been struggling with injury.
Yep.
But now the Bulldogs have found a player they've probably been looking for in terms of bolstering up that forward 50 area.
Yeah, is it a strange move, do you think, for the Western Bulldogs as well? I mean, I guess he's not a tall forward, so he fits that more high push-up half-forward player. But I just wondered if Hannon was going to leave somewhere, he'd go somewhere that had a few more holes in their forward line. I mean, we know that they've got Aaron Norton coming back from injury. We know that they've got Josh Bruce. Josh Shackey's struggled for form, but he's still there as well. Anyway, let's hope it works out. Clearly, Luke Beveridge has sold him something that he likes, and you wouldn't think that Hannon would leave Melbourne unless he knew that it was going to be at a place where he was going to be playing 22 games a year.
He does have some history there too, part of their VFL program before he went
to
Melbourne. The D's involved in the only other deal of the day. It was just a pick swap with Adelaide, but potentially significant because of what they got and gave away. They gave away a future second, future fourth. They got back pick 33 and another later pick now. We believe that pick 33 could potentially involve Ben Brown. So that's a great result for Melbourne, isn't it, if they can get Ben Brown for that price?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a guy that kicked basically as many goals as Jeremy Cameron did. In fact, more over a 3-year period before going into 2020. We know that he struggled with form and injury since then. So is he the player that Melbourne want in the sense of... I personally think that if Ben Brown is going to be the player that he was at North Melbourne when he was kicking goals, Melbourne are really going to have to change the way they go inside 50, because the last couple of years, they haven't had a problem getting it, and their midfield's very strong. It's been using it going inside 50. Ben Brown's not the type of forward that you're going to kick it on his head and he's going to take pack marks. You need to hit him on the lead. If they can do that consistently, he's going to kick goals for them.
Well, we've been wrapped up, Sam. No Kane this week, but we've managed to fill it in okay.
Well, we had the phone, and the phone I thought was a good third banana in the end.
We'll be back tomorrow for more from the Trade Desk.
See you then.